Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts your school community. Plus, special guest today, the state superintendent of public instruction, Tony Thurmond, here to talk about the letter released last week about educational and instructional materials.
The ACSA legislative lunch break starts now.
Couple of minutes after 1 o'clock, we welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA legislative lunch break, along with ACSA's executive director, Dr. Edgar Zazwata. I'm Naj Alikan, ACSA's senior director of marketing and communications. Welcome. We are honored to have you here on a Wednesday. Go ahead and jump into the chat and say hello. Let us know where you're watching from today. Edgar, our very first person on the chat, logged on 22 minutes before the show. So clearly Mina Blasi not only wanted to beat Sheldon Smith today, but is very excited about the conversation, which is fantastic.
Maybe they thought you were giving away free giveaway stickers, something, some tickets to, maybe our superintendent was giving out free tickets to, some event, some popular event at CDE there. Maybe I missed the memo, but I appreciate, I always appreciate folks jumping on, being excited to engage in our chat. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. It's and we always try to start the show on lighthearted and it's great to be here. Frankly, I know a lot going on. I know it's interesting time of year where the folks, our members are definitely like winding down. A lot of them have already wound down the school year. Some of them are right at the brink here. I know there's some schools just finishing up. I love this time of year when you see the graduations and everything going on. The flip side of that, it's challenging times. We're going to talk about it. Just what the headlines have been out in the news, some of the issues that are impacting our members, obviously pertinent to all this. So I think us trying to juggle and trying to make sure that we're staying on top of this and asking our members just how we can support them, through some of these challenges. So really excited for the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much going on right now that, as you said, the end of the school year for so many school districts out there, but so many news headlines going on. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Sheldon Smith also with us today, Lester Powell, Neri, Mark Campbell with us, Jamie Green with us. Happy to have all of you guys with us today. Let's do a couple of news headlines before we get started today. Edgar, we've got this story that came out of EdSource published this morning on special education services. This is an article that kind of looks at the national picture as far as special needs. It talked about the impact of COVID disruptions on young children with developmental delays and how elementary schools are not serving students with those elevated needs during the COVID-19 disruption. Now, the data indicated some deep decline in the number of 3- and 4-year-olds receiving special education services. Again, this is nationwide data. And one stakeholder indicates that, quote, there's a very good likelihood that those children are going to show up either on the first day of preschool or the first day of kindergarten needing more services than they otherwise would have needed. Edgar, we talked so much about, the COVID disruption and the impact of our students. The special needs students definitely part of that discussion, but this nationwide data was certainly impactful. And that quote from that federal stakeholder about kids showing up to those early stages of school needing more support definitely puts a spotlight on the additional needs that these students are going to need.
Yeah, I think, and it's funny, we had the superintendent on today, and I remember there in those months in the pandemic, we were all struggling. The state was struggling. We were all trying to figure out, what is it that us as a system we're going to do to support these students. The system pivoted, right, and tried to offer as much as it could through the virtual aspect, knowing that there's students there that need a different level of service and a different delivery. And I think the system tried mightily to go about that while also working around all the other restrictions that were taking place at that time. The bottom line, and I don't think there's one educator in this state that would not concur with the statement that, yes, the pandemic had an impact on kids. The pandemic had the most impact on those who were already in need. So I think every time we see one of these headlines, it just validates what I think folks in the field already knew, that it was a very tough time. And now the challenge for the system is, what do we do about that? That those services, those resources, that time that maybe kids didn't get everything that they needed, how can we try to make up for some of that lost time? I think has been one of the challenges here over the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Also want to take you down to Southern California, Glendale Unified. There was a school board meeting in Glendale Unified last night. We'll show you this video from our colleagues over at KCBS in Los Angeles. LGBTQ supporters and anti-LGBTQ supporters clapped outside of district office before and during a school board meeting where district leaders were voting on recognizing June as Pride Month in the district. The meeting was cut short, according to the LA Times, as the shelter-in-place order was put into effect as fighting broke out outside of the meeting. According to the board president, this is the fourth year in a row that the district had called for recognizing Pride Month. And of note, the school board unanimously approved to recognize June as Pride Month. But Edgar, I was looking at that video last night, looking at it this morning before the show. Some impactful video there in that school community, and an important decision made by the board members last night.
Yeah, Naj, I mean, I don't know what else to say. There's so much that could be said about what took place in Glendale. And it's not, this got the latest headlines. I know there were some other issues there in North Hollywood and the LAUSD schools. We've heard about a lot of this throughout the state. It's sad. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. It's a sad day, right? And like you noted in the headlines, that these are not unique. Boards taking action to recognize Pride Month, boards trying to uplift the supports for LGBTQ students. There's nothing new there. I have to say, this is why I say it's a challenging time, because it does feel like the emotions around these issues have definitely escalated, right? And we're not immune to this. While we've been trying, and we had this conversation last week, over the last couple of weeks. For example, we have tried to step up our efforts on supporting many of these communities that we're talking about. We were very proud to have our Lead with Pride conference. We've tried to think about professional development, not just for our educators, but our educators in their efforts to support students. And I'll admit, some of the things we've done don't always get viewed in the best light from some of our communities, from some of our members. We've had situations like this where folks are upset at their school districts for ACSA supporting these type of things, and we get some of those emails and messages. And sometimes, here's the thing, we're an umbrella organization. We have members throughout the state with various views, and I think we're always trying to be careful about reflecting everybody. And then we've even got asked the question, and I think I'll be very transparent here. ACSA's got the question, hey, is ACSA getting too political on some of these fronts? And here's the thing, and this is my opinion, this is my humble opinion, but also one that I think reflects the values of our leadership, our Board of Education. I think the vast majority of our members. This is not about politics. Yeah, these issues aren't about politics. I mean, when you look at the statistics, I know we were reflecting on some statistics a few weeks ago. I think the National School Climate Survey said that 68% of LGBTQ students say they feel unsafe, going to school. Yeah. When you reflect upon that, this isn't about politics. Our North Star is about what can we do to support kids. I mean, as you and I, both as parents, and I know this goes for Tony Thurmond, as parents of young teenagers, when I see a statistic that 32% of LGBTQ students say that they avoid school activities, 40% avoided bathrooms, locker rooms, physical education, 79% avoided school functions because they just don't feel safe. I mean, I think for us, it's there's a lot to do on this front. Now, we're going to get into this conversation with the superintendent about local control and what right parents have. It's a tricky place, right? And it's one that I'll say first off to our members, we're just trying to do right. And I think oftentimes we may step into something that not everybody agrees to, but I just know that it's really in the spirit of not politics on this end. It's about what do we do to support students. But just very sad about what's going on in Glendale that that happened. I know we were in communication with Dr. Vivian Ection. They're a great superintendent, personal friend of mine there. And this is something that's popping out. There's healing that needs to be done, not just in our state, around the country. Unfortunately, it's another example of what we've been saying, that so many of the culture wars, culture fights that are playing themselves out in our communities are now playing themselves out in our schools.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well said. Well, let's go ahead and bring in our special guest today. We are honored to have the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, with us. This is the third time Tony has been on the show. So it seems, Tony, that it's appropriate that we get you business cards now from ACSA, that after your professional title, that we put frequent ACSA legislative lunch break guest on there, because you have to, it's like that 5 times when you host SNL, it's like 3 times when you come on the lunch break, you get your own business cards here. So welcome. We're honored to have you. Let me just go directly to that letter on educational rights and removal of instructional material that was sent out last week. What brought you, the governor, the attorney general, to that moment where you had to say something?
Well, good day, Edgar and Naj, and to everyone at ACSA. And let me just start by acknowledging everyone in the ACSA family, all of our school administrators at every level, for what you do. As Edgar pointed out, these are very difficult times, and we're seeing things that I never thought we'd see. In spite of that, I'm grateful for all of you who are making sure our students continue to get access to a quality education. So thank you. Naj, the letter really just reflects that there is this nationwide trend to ban books, to strip inclusive education away from our kids. And I'm grateful that we live in California, not in Florida or some other state like Texas, where all these efforts are being made to strip away inclusive education. And it is wounding many students, not just students of color or LGBTQ plus students, but students from all backgrounds. Inclusive education helps kids be successful. And that's why we do it, because of the academic and social supports. And so I'm grateful to be in a state where we have a governor and an attorney general who said, let's all stand together and work together on behalf of our students and our schools. And this is the first of many efforts that you'll see to support California school leaders and students and our families.
Mr. Superintendent, Tony, thank you as always for joining us. We always get excited, and I know that our viewers do too, for you being generous with your time and joining us here. So getting back to the letter, I think one of the pieces you alluded to this, that one of the key considerations that was laid out, by yourself and the governor and the attorney general, is that the Constitution restricts the removal of books because freedom of speech or expression, and you clarify that school districts or administrators may remove books or other materials because of their educational value, right? The vulgarity, profanity, factually. If you may, I'll actually throw out a quote. Say, quote, may not remove books from school libraries simply because officials dislike the ideas contained in those books. You've been on a school board. That, how some of these conversations play out. I think the intent was a good one. I will ask, and I think this is just because we hear this other piece, that sometimes it's easier said than done, right? In terms of how do some of these edicts play themselves out in terms of implementation? Because you've been on the school board, you see some of these conversations come to folks. I mean, what would you say to those folks that said, yeah, no, we appreciate what the state's trying to do, but is this taking away local control? Is this trying to, put the power in that of the state? Kind of what would you react to those that may have that perspective?
Yeah, I fully support local control. It's a firm tradition in our state. And at the end of the day, school districts and their boards make decisions about what our students get access to. But the problems and challenges that we are seeing they're not occurring only at a local level. They are occurring at the state level and at a national level. And so I believe that the state of California has a responsibility to support our local leaders who are experiencing the most intensity on the ground level. And it is our responsibility as state leaders to help our school district leaders. Edgar and Naj, you both know that my philosophy is that state policy needs to reflect the ideas, the aspirations, and the needs of leaders in local communities. And that doesn't always happen. A lot of stuff gets pushed down from the state level, and school leaders at the school level have to try to find a way to implement that. And I love to go and talk to school leaders to figure out, what do you need? And then to bring that to the legislature and to the governor and to advocate. We're sponsoring 20 bills this year that are all about what schools need. I'm very proud of our bill that would make it easier for substitute teachers to continue, retired teachers to continue substituting in our schools while we deal with this teacher shortage. And so the letter really grows from a desire to have state officials support our local school leaders, not to in any way take away from local control. We're your partners. And quite frankly, I'm hearing from local leaders all the time who are saying, what can you do to help us? And so this is one step, and we'll continue to do more.
Folks, if you have any questions for our state superintendent, go ahead and put those into the chat, and we'll try and tackle some of those at the back end of the show. Tony, the second key consideration talks about exposing students to various worldviews. Let me mention one piece. Schools, quote, bring together members of different racial and cultural groups and hopefully help them to live together in harmony and mutual respect. As we showed earlier, there is divisiveness all over the country, even here in California, but California seems to be a little bit more of an accepting place than others, especially some of the states that you mentioned. But what made you, the governor, the attorney general, take this step to go out there, publish a letter like this, and specifically point to constitutional rights, to some of the responsibilities of the board? What kind of got you guys to focus on a couple of these key considerations?
I think it's been building, and it's heartbreaking to see what we're seeing in places like Glendale and, North Hollywood and other places, that someone would burn a pride flag, that people would erupt into violence. We're a big state with lots of ideas and lots of diversity of people. That means that we can agree to disagree without being disagreeable. What message does it send to our children when the way we engage in debate erupts into a fist fight? We talk to our kids about using their critical thinking. And so it's incumbent on us as the adults to find a way to work through our differences. And so simply put, we don't want the tone and the tenor of what's happening in the Floridas and the Texases to impact California. But this is a nationwide movement of folks who are attacking our students and attacking our traditions. And, when you look at what we're providing in California with ethnic studies as a graduation requirement, that will help many of our students of color. And at the same time, that is something that is proven to support the academic success of all of our students. And so we're simply saying that inclusive education works, and the supports that we provide to LGBTQ plus students helps them socially. It reduces bullying, it reduces absenteeism. And it's sad, Edgar referenced, the climate, suicide sadly is considered the second largest cause of death for our LGBTQ plus students. And so inclusive education makes a difference. The message that's coming across in this letter could help to save a life. It simply says that the law is clear, that you cannot discriminate against our kids, that they have the right to get an education. And just because someone doesn't agree with a perspective, they don't have the right to block it or ban it or strip it out of what our students get access to.
Tony, I know one of the things that, CDE took under your leadership, or I think it was squarely you, and, set the tone for the rest of the state is, I know last week you folks flew the pride flag for the first time here at a state building here in California. And it's interesting. And I was privileged to be able to be at that ceremony. And one of the narratives from a lot of our local officials is that we're lucky to be here in California, that we're not necessarily dealing with issues like Florida or Texas or you name it, right? But I think on the flip side, I think, you and I had this conversation. We can't take that for granted. I mean, we see what's happening here. I mean, we just noted it in some of the headlines in Glendale. I see some of our members there noting in the chat that they're dealing with some of these issues in their own communities. Hence what I was talking about at the opening of the show, that this is not an easy issue, even for us as an organization that's trying to represent everybody, and we're really trying to do what's right by students. We have some members sometimes that are kind of upset at some of the stances that we take in our spirit of trying to support students. I mean, so as the top education official, what would you say? Like, I think we all agree we have a problem here in terms of we probably are at a moment of elevated emotions about people really being dug into their own positions. How does our system move forward? What do we do as a state to try to maybe achieve some of these, the spirit of these values that we're talking about in terms of trying to bring people together. It almost feels like it's never been more difficult, even as we've had more and more efforts along those lines. I mean, what's your perspective on this?
My perspective is that our communities are going to need healing. When you look at what happened in Glendale, you see our communities being torn apart. And I think that we have to work to heal our communities. And I just want to give a shout out to the superintendent in Glendale, Vivian Etienne, who's an incredible leader, and to her board. They're coming under fire, literally, and they're standing up for all students. And we need to support them and to recognize the great work that's happening. And sadly, this vitriol and this fighting and this tension is overshadowing that Glendale Unified School District is a district that has actually been able to reverse declining enrollment. We had them on a webinar last week where we talked about how school districts can reverse declining enrollment. And they've got great programs in STEAM and dual language immersion. They do great outreach to families. They're promoting their TK and all these great things. All these great things that are happening in schools and districts like Glendale Unified, they're being overshadowed by those who wish to tear us apart. And I guess my message would be that let us find ways to find commonality and common ground. Let us solve our differences without violence. We can agree to disagree without being disagreeable. We have to work together and to just acknowledge that inclusive education is proven to support academic achievement and social development of our students. It's being done for a purpose because it benefits our students. And, there are a lot of great things happening in California, and I don't want that to be overshadowed. The fact that we are able to provide universal preschool for every 3 and 4-year-old in our state, universal meals, 2 meals a day for every hungry student, that we will have counselors for, our schools, 10,000 counselors. We secured the funding for that, $4 billion for community schools. Great things are happening in our state, and I don't want them to be overshadowed. And I think we have to find ways to heal our communities and to have dialogue on how we support inclusive education. We don't need our communities to be ripped apart. We need to look for solutions and common ground. That's the message I'd like to provide.
Yeah, a couple of things, Tony, that you just said in your last 2 responses. Inclusive education works. It makes a difference. That is great. Also, the finding commonality, finding common ground. Definitely important that we consider those 2 things. And thank you for those data points from Glendale. That's great to hear about the enrollment. So I guess, we've talked so much about these contentious times. And so I think it would be important to think about, how do we move forward in the best interest of students? Is there something that you would say to our education leaders about moving forward, about next steps?
Yeah, thanks, Naj. One, we've put out guidance in addition to the letter. The Department of Education has put out guidance to help school districts be aware of what's in legislation now, what's in Ed Code that speaks to why students should have a right to an education without discrimination. It allows our schools to understand what the law says and how students can be protected to have an inclusive education. Beyond that, Naj, I would just say, let us lead with our hearts here, and to think about our students and how our students feel. And I've heard from a lot of students who feel threatened. They feel unsafe. Our students are speaking up and speaking out about what they want to have access to in terms of inclusive education. They get threatened. People go on social media and say horrendous things to them and about them. To me, that seems a little out of bounds. These are young people and they're learning how to use their voice. We encourage civics and they're getting involved and asking for what they'd like to have. Let's give them a space to say what they want to say without the threat of violence, without the fear of their safety being affected. Let's look at the benefits that inclusive education can provide. And there is a role for parents to give voice. No one is saying that parents can't have voice in these conversations. No one should be trying to take away anyone's rights. Our school districts have always had traditions where parents can give input into what's in the curriculum, right? That starts with the school site council, and sometimes there are special curriculum committees where teachers and classified staff and parents work together. We can find creative ways to engage in these conversations, but I would implore us all to lead with our heart and to think about the example that we set for our kids when we fight in a way where we're tearing at each other. How can we tell our children to use their critical thinking if we don't as the adults. And I think that this is a inflection point for us. Our country's going through a tough place. We have to focus more on how we come together rather than how we are apart. We have more than 200 languages spoken in our districts, in our state. We have an incredible diversity here. We have an opportunity to say that we embrace that diversity and that we're better for it, and that we can work together in a way that every single student will be better as we build those partnerships and collaborations and find ways to work together. And again, just lead with your heart and think about what our students need. Think about what our students feel when they hear adults saying awful things about them and about the leaders that they want to see represented in their schools.
The State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, with us today. Tony, thank you so much for being with us. It's been an honor to have you on the show. We will have your business cards ready for you the next time you join us.
It's been an honor every time to join. Thank you for what you all do, and thank you to all of the folks in the ACSA community for the great things you're doing for California kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, so much. Edgar, I want to make mention of something because Tony made mention of it. He talked about civics, which gives me an opportunity to talk to you about what we've done on our ACSA Resource Hub. Our partners over at F3 Law have produced some free speech videos that are available to school districts out there, specifically for their government classes, 3-part video resources on civics, freedom of speech. So you can access those on our ACSA Resource Hub. Also, if you like what you've seen on the show and you'd like to subscribe to us, go ahead and do that on our YouTube page. You can subscribe to us. You can also like us on Facebook. Anytime we are about to come up live or have our regularly scheduled broadcasts, you will get an alert on that. And of course, if you have any great stories happening in your school district, we want to tell your stories as well. Go ahead and send that information, your pictures, your talking points, your news releases to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl at mcarl@axa.org. Edgar, let's, I just want to wrap this up because I think, again, Tony said some incredible things, but those few things that I pulled out about finding commonality, he mentioned civics, the inclusive education works. You've said many times, hey, we got to take a breath. You said it on January 6th. You've said it many times. We got to take a breath. We see these things popping up. When you hear what Tony had to say, your thoughts as we wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I mean, I appreciated all the commentary. I appreciated just the positive vibes. I think it goes to show that even in difficult moments, it's our educators, it's the folks that are serving kids. See that they have their eye on the focus, which is those students. I mean, I think the best way to reflect, I'll actually use not my own words, but I thought Helio in the chat said it best, and I think it's worth repeating. The hate and evil can only be eradicated by compassion and education. And this couldn't be more true. I know we all see this, that kids are very much aware of the hate that is being voiced, and that we must support them. We must support the kids. So I think, best said from those folks doing the work. And I think us at ACSA, we're going to continue. We're going to continue to try to provide those supports. We're going to try to continue to also think about those folks that are trying to do this work, maybe in communities that it's hard to put these messages out, that frankly, it's hard to have a conversation even like the one we're having today. So that's our effort. And like I said at the beginning, it's not going to come without trial and error sometimes in terms of how would he move those messages, how would he move the support. But I think we have to stay focused on that objective.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, thank you so much for joining us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live here Wednesdays, 1 p.m. and it's budget week next week, so we'll be on the air for you. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.